What if everything you were taught about where Indians come from is only a fraction of the truth? Not wrong exactly, but incomplete in ways that should make us all pause and rethink. Two stories have been fighting over this question for generations. One says outsiders came and built India. The other says India built itself and gave the world everything. Ancient DNA just stepped into that fight, and it didn't pick a winner. It revealed that both sides were arguing over a story that was never theirs to claim. Before we go deeper, here's something simple you can do right now. If questions like this make you curious about the hidden layers of human history, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who loves digging into the real story behind the world we live in. It costs you nothing. It means everything for this kind of content to keep reaching people. Now, let's get into it. India is one of the oldest living civilizations on the planet. Its languages, its philosophies, its traditions, these didn't appear overnight. They grew over thousands of years, layer by layer, shaped by people, movement, and time. But for all the depth of that history, the question of who those first people actually were, where they came from, and how they came to be, that question has been trapped inside politics for a very long time. On one side, you have the older colonial era idea. A group called the Aryans swept into the Indian subcontinent from somewhere in Central Asia or Europe, and they built, or at least kick-started, what we now call Indian civilization. This story was popular among European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries. It had a very convenient implication that the great things about India came from outside. On the other side, a powerful counter-narrative developed over time, especially among those who rejected that colonial framing. This story insists that the people of India are entirely indigenous, that the Aryans didn't come from outside. They were born here, that civilization didn't flow into India. It flowed outward from India to the rest of the world. Both of these stories feel satisfying to someone. Both carry emotional weight. Both have defenders willing to argue fiercely for them. And both of them, according to the latest ancient DNA research, are missing the point. Because the actual story of where Indians come from isn't a single clean origin. It's at least three origins, layered on top of each other, across tens of thousands of years. And the truth is older, stranger, and far more extraordinary than any political narrative was ever prepared to admit. Let's start with the land itself, because geography here isn't just background. It's the reason the story unfolded the way it did. Look at a map of the Indian subcontinent. To the north, the Himalayas form one of the most imposing natural barriers anywhere on Earth. These aren't just mountains, they are a wall. Stretching across thousands of kilometers, they effectively seal the subcontinent off from the vast interior of Asia. To the south, east, and west, ocean. Three sides of the subcontinent bordered by water. That leaves one realistic entry point for large-scale ancient human movement: the northwest. The passes and valleys that connect what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan to Central Asia. This narrow corridor has been the gateway into South Asia for tens of thousands of years. Almost every major migration that shaped this part of the world came through that same door. And once people entered through that door, they didn't land in a uniform landscape. The interior of the subcontinent is itself broken into natural compartments. The Great Gangetic Plain sweeps across the north. The Deccan Plateau rises through central India. The Western Ghats hug the southwestern coast. The Thar Desert guards the northwest. Each of these geographic zones shaped where people moved, where they settled, how long they stayed isolated, and when they eventually mixed with others. The result, after tens of thousands of years of this process, is what scientists today describe as one of the most genetically diverse countries on Earth. More than 1.4 billion people, roughly 5,000 distinct ethnic, linguistic, and caste communities, and a population that carries the genetic fingerprints of migrations stretching back 50,000 years. That number, 50,000 years, is where the real story begins. When researchers dig into the deepest layer of South Asian ancestry using ancient DNA analysis, they find a population that geneticists call the ancient ancestral South Indians, or AASI. These were hunter-gatherers. They entered the subcontinent around 50,000 years ago as part of the great dispersal of our species out of Africa. And research now suggests that the overwhelming majority of genetic variation found across modern India traces back to this single founding wave. These people weren't a small group hiding along one riverbank. They spread across the entire subcontinent, from the high northwest all the way down to the southern tip of the peninsula. They were everywhere. They became the foundation, the bedrock layer of South Asia's human story. The closest living glimpse into what this ancient population looked like, at least genetically, may come from the indigenous people of the Andaman Islands. These remote islands in the Bay of Bengal sat largely outside the path of the major migrations that reshaped mainland India over the millennia. The DNA of Andamanese people carries proportions of AASI-related ancestry that aren't found in quite the same way anywhere else on the mainland. In a very real sense, they represent a living echo of a South Asia that existed before farming, before cities, before any of the migrations that would follow. But those migrations were coming. Around 10,000 years ago, something new appeared in the ancestral record. A second layer began to arrive. Ancient farmers, a lineage connected to populations on the Iranian plateau, began moving toward the subcontinent's northwestern corridor. They brought agricultural knowledge, the ability to grow food, settle land, and sustain larger communities. But what happened next wasn't a simple replacement. It wasn't a wave of newcomers wiping out those who were already there. The picture is more nuanced than that. Ancient DNA evidence from sites connected to the Indus Valley suggests that farming in South Asia may have spread partly through cultural exchange, and possibly through independent local development, rather than being carried entirely by a mass influx of new people. What happened was mixing. The incoming Iranian-related farmers and the AASI people already living across the northwest began to come together. Over generations, over centuries, this combination of ancestries produced something new, a population that would go on to build one of the ancient world's most remarkable civilizations. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, the Indus Valley Civilization. By around 2600 BCE, these cities were extraordinary by any measure of the ancient world. Populations estimated between 40 and 50,000 people, planned street grids, brick drainage systems more sophisticated than anything found in contemporary civilizations, standardized weights and measures used across long-distance trade networks that stretched all the way to Mesopotamia. These were contemporaries of ancient Egypt. In some respects, they were more systematically organized. This was not primitive. This was a full urban civilization of genuine complexity and sophistication, and it was built by people who were already themselves a mixture, the product of ancient South Asian hunter-gatherers and Iranian plateau farmers, blended together over many generations. Then, in 2019, a single burial site changed the entire conversation. Researchers published the DNA analysis of a skeleton found at a village called Rakhigarhi in the modern Indian state of Haryana. This skeleton was approximately 4,500 years old, and Rakhigarhi wasn't just any site. It may have been one of the largest urban centers of the entire Indus Valley Civilization. The result was striking. This individual, someone who lived right at the heart of one of the ancient world's great cities, carried no detectable steppe ancestry. None at all. The migration that would eventually reshape the genetics of northern India had simply not happened yet. The Indus Valley Civilization was still fully intact, and the people living inside it carried no trace of what was about to arrive. Now pause here for a second. You're watching a channel that takes history seriously, the kind of history that doesn't make headlines, but changes how you see the entire world. If this is clicking for you, drop a comment below telling us which part surprised you most. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications. Because the next video in this series is going to go somewhere most history channels are afraid to go. Back to the story. Roughly 4,000 years ago, as the Indus Valley Civilization began to enter its period of decline, weakened possibly by shifting monsoon patterns, environmental stress, or internal pressures, something was moving towards South Asia from the west. From the vast grasslands stretching between Eastern Europe and Central Asia, a region researchers call the Pontic-Caspian steppe. Populations of nomadic pastoralists had been expanding outward for centuries. These were mobile, livestock-herding people, genetically related to groups archaeologists associate with the Yamnaya culture. They had already begun spreading westward into Europe, and now a branch of their descendants turned southeast, moving through the passes and corridors of Central Asia, and entering the Indian subcontinent through that same northwestern gateway that had channeled human movement for 50,000 years. The genetic signature they carried, what researchers call steppe ancestry, matches almost exactly the profile found in Bronze Age populations of Eastern Europe. This is not a coincidence. It reflects a single dispersal event, one migration that reshaped two continents almost simultaneously, sending one stream of people west toward Europe and another stream southeast toward South Asia. The languages these people carried almost certainly belonged to the Indo-European family. When they moved west, their tongue eventually gave rise to Greek, Latin, the Germanic languages, the Slavic languages, and eventually English. When they moved southeast into South Asia, their language gave rise to Sanskrit, and from Sanskrit eventually came Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Bengali, and the other Indo-European languages spoken across northern India today. That is the actual connection between Hindi and English. It's not a metaphor. It's not a colonial coincidence. It is the genetic and cultural residue of a migration that happened 4,000 years ago on the Eurasian steppe. Both languages share a common ancestor because the people who carried that ancestor split, one group going west, another going east. But here is something important that the DNA also shows. This was not a conquest that erased what came before. The steppe migrants did not replace the Indus Valley descended populations. They mixed with them. The evidence suggests this mixing may have been significantly male-biased, meaning the steppe ancestry signal appears more strongly in paternal lineages than maternal ones. This hints that men from the steppe entered existing communities, rather than entire steppe family groups arriving to push local ones out. The result of this mixing in the Northwest was a population geneticists call Ancestral North Indians, or ANI, carrying both IVC-related and steppe-related ancestry blended together. At roughly the same time, IVC-related people who had moved south and east during the civilization's decline were mixing with communities that carried higher proportions of the oldest AASI ancestry. This southern mixing produced a separate population that researchers call Ancestral South Indians, or ASI. These two ancestral groups, ANI in the north, ASI in the south, then continued to mix with each other across the subcontinent for centuries. And then something remarkable happened. Research suggests that somewhere between 1,300 and 4,200 years ago, the mixing largely stopped. Social and cultural practices, particularly endogamy, the custom of marrying within one's own community, became enforced and entrenched across large parts of South Asia. As the caste system solidified over time, it effectively froze these layered ancestries in place. Communities stopped marrying outside their group, and because of that, the ancient ancestry proportions that existed when endogamy began were preserved, locked inside specific social groups where they have remained for thousands of years. The genetic consequence is extraordinary. Researchers have found that genetic differences between neighboring caste communities, groups living in the same region, sometimes the same village, can be striking, not because of any recent separation, but because of thousands of years of endogamy that kept those ancient ancestry layers distinct and separate inside different social containers. The caste system has caused immense suffering throughout Indian history. That's not in question. The inequality it created and enforced is real and well documented. But from a purely scientific vantage point, the same system inadvertently created something else, one of the most detailed living records of ancient human population structure found anywhere on Earth. The very walls that divided people also preserved, like specimens in amber, the genetic evidence of how those people came to exist in the first place. Those ancestry layers look different depending on where in India you stand. Researchers describe what they call a cline, a gradient running roughly from north to south, that tracks the proportions of ANI versus ASI ancestry. In general, populations in northern India carry higher proportions of steppe-related and Iranian farmer-related ancestry. Populations in southern India, particularly among Dravidian language speakers like Tamil, Kannada, and Telugu, carry higher proportions of ASI ancestry, reflecting those older AASI and IVC-related layers that mixed more heavily in the south. Certain tribal populations in southern India carry the highest proportions of AASI-related ancestry found anywhere on the mainland. They are, in a very real genetic sense, living windows into South Asia before farming, before the steppe migration, before cities, before almost everything that followed. Before cities, before almost everything that followed. The Northeast tells yet another story, a third distinct cluster shaped by ancient connections to Southeast Asian populations, reflecting the eastern corridors of movement that have always existed alongside the more documented northwestern ones. And none of these patterns respect modern national borders. Genetic zones formed over thousands of years of migration, and isolation don't stop at the line between India and Pakistan, or India and Bangladesh, or India and Sri Lanka. The DNA doesn't know those lines exist, because they didn't, not when the real story was being written. Now consider what all of this does to the old arguments. The colonial-era Aryan invasion model imagined a conquering group of outsiders arriving to dominate a passive indigenous population, essentially writing the foundation of Indian civilization in from the outside. But the DNA doesn't show domination. It shows mixture. The original populations of South Asia, the descendants of those ancient hunter-gatherers and the builders of the Indus Valley Civilization, were not swept aside. They form the genetic backbone of modern South Asians, North and South alike. The newcomers added to what was there. They didn't replace it. The Hindu nationalist counter-narrative insists on complete indigenous origin, that nothing meaningful came from outside, that Indian civilization emerged fully from within. But the DNA doesn't support this either. The Iranian farmer ancestry present across South Asia arrived from outside the subcontinent. The steppe ancestry present most strongly in northern India also arrived from outside. These aren't recent foreign impositions. They are ancient migrations. Events so old they predate the very idea of India as a political or cultural concept. Carrying their genetic legacy doesn't make anyone less Indian in any meaningful cultural sense. It simply means the population history of South Asia is older and more connected to the wider world than any story allows. And the idea that North and South Indians are fundamentally different peoples, that one group is more authentically Indian than the other, also dissolves under the evidence. Both carry the same three foundational ancestry sources. The proportions differ depending on region and community, The core ingredients do not. What science now supports is something no single myth could have predicted. Around 50,000 years ago, the first modern humans to reach South Asia spread across a subcontinent that had never known our species. Their descendants became the foundation on which everything else would be built. Thousands of years later, ancient farmers connected to the Iranian plateau moved into the northwest and mixed with those older hunter-gatherers, producing the population that built the cities of the Indus. Then, around 4,000 years ago, Steppe pastoralists arrived through those same northwestern corridors, bringing with them a new ancestry and a language family that would eventually connect Hindi to English and Sanskrit to Russian. The older IVC-related populations absorbed this in the north. Their southern relatives mixed more deeply with ancient hunter-gatherer descendants, producing the AASI. All of these mixed populations then came together across the subcontinent in varying proportions, before endogamy gradually preserved those proportions as distinct community signatures that persist today. The diversity of India, its hundreds of languages, its thousands of communities, its regional differences, its ancient tribal groups carrying memories older than any written text, none of this is an accident. It is the consequence of 50,000 years of movement, adaptation, mixing, and survival on a subcontinent, shaped by mountains, rivers, deserts, and ocean. The country on the map is real. The culture is real. The history is real and profound and worth protecting. But beneath all of it, the DNA reveals something that no origin story, not the colonial one, not the nationalist one, could have fully imagined. A layering of ancestries so deep and so ancient that the question of where Indians come from doesn't have one answer. It has at least three. And each one reaches further back into time than the argument that came before it. The people of India are not the product of one moment. They are the product of 50,000 years of this earth being crossed, settled, mixed, and reimagined by human beings who were simply trying to survive and build something that would last. And it did last. That's the part that should stop you cold. 3 migrations, 50,000 years, and the result is one of the most genetically complex, culturally rich, and historically layered civilizations our species has ever produced. Not despite the mixing, because of it. If this changed the way you see India, or the way you see human history itself, then this channel has more waiting for you. We go deep on the questions that actually matter, the ones that reshape how you understand the world. So here's the final ask, and we mean it. Subscribe. Share this video with someone who thinks they already know the full story, and let's keep pulling back the layers together. Because the truth, it turns out, is always older and stranger than what we were told.